Hi, Facebook friends. Helen Arcantu here, CEO of the YWCA of Northern New Jersey. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm so grateful to be with you this evening. If you don't know, we want to be sure to tell you that from September 15th to October 15th, we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. And as I always say, whenever we talk about these months, we should be celebrating all that we focus on in these months and be focused on them throughout the year. But the nice thing about having the months is it is an opportunity to bring some extra attention to some important issues, educate ourselves, and celebrate and honor the whatever we're highlighting. In this month, it is Hispanic Heritage Month. And tonight we thought we would bring some attention to a very important issue about Latino mental health awareness. We know that mental health is hopefully something in this country, especially after the last few years, something that we're feeling more comfortable to talk about. And we have seen some shifts both federally and here in New Jersey with some more funding coming into the area of mental health. But even with that, there still is a stigma around mental health, and even more so in the Latino community, there are other issues that we need to be aware of and highlight and talk about. And this is an important conversation for everyone, whether you are Latino or whether you are not Latino. I am a white woman and I am of Greek heritage, but this is an important conversation for me to hear and be part of as well, because we want our communities to be strong. We want our friends to be strong, our neighbors to be strong. We want all the children in our schools to be strong. We want everyone in our community to be strong. And it's an opportunity for us to learn how we can actively be part of helping that happen when we have a better understanding. So I'm so grateful to our guests today who have taken time to share with us their knowledge on this topic. And let me just say their knowledge ranges in many more places and spaces than this topic for sure. But this is an area tonight that we will focus together. I want to welcome Dr. Jessely de la Cruz and also Valeria Aloe, who are my guests this evening. And together we are going to explore some strategies and some solutions, some resources, and some realities around Latino mental health equity. And again, our hope is that we can break down some barriers and really create an opportunity for well-being and for all, because that's what we are looking for. Let me tell you a little bit about our guests so that you, in case you don't know them, Dr. Jessely de la Cruz is a clinical social worker here in the state of New Jersey. She is also the executive director for the Latino Action Network Foundation. You will have the link to their organization and to follow the important work that they're doing. I do encourage you to check it out, follow them on social media, check out their website so you can learn about their work. Dr. de la Cruz herself originated from an underprivileged background, being a child of an immigrant family, and her education and her work has been motivated by her desire to support traditionally underserved populations. Her clinical experience includes providing emergency screening of persons in mental health crisis at an inner city hospital, outpatient, and an in-home child and family therapy, and clinical consultation for nursing homes with primarily Spanish-speaking residents. She is committed to dedicating her time to using her skills to help organizations that serve and support and empower Latino communities, BIPOC and LGBT youth, and families living below the federal poverty limit. And also we have with us, as I said, Valeria Aloe, who is the first in her family to graduate from college and enter in professional spaces in the United States and in her native Argentina. She is the creator of the Mindset Transformation and Behavior Change Movement, Rising Together. She is a speaker, an entrepreneurship coach, and an award-winning author on her book, Uncolonized Latinas, Transforming Our Mindsets and Rising Together. Before launching her book and the movement, Valeria worked more than 20 years in brand management, business development, and finance in leading companies across 7 countries, and including Procter & Gamble, Citibank, Reckitt Benckiser, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Her work has earned her several awards, including the Top 50 Women in Business in New Jersey in 2020 and the 5th most influential Hispanic in New Jersey in 2021. I want to welcome you both. I personally am fangirl of both of these important human beings that I'm with this evening. I happened to see Valeria speak a few years ago at an NJPAC Women event where she was really the first time I got to hear her talk, and she gave me so much to think about at that event. And I've had the opportunity to be in Dr. De La Cruz's presence, both clinically in her work as well as all of her social justice work. I've women's marches, and she's doing such important work in organizing in our state as well. And so we are so grateful to have you both with us. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
So we'll jump into some questions. I know that I have a lot of information that we've collected to talk about Latino mental health, but I can go back to it, but let's jump into the questions. I think some of it will just naturally come out in the course of the discussion for sure. And I want to give us time to hear from both of you and less time to hear me. So most importantly, so let's start with Latino mental health and the barriers that in accessing mental health care. Dr. De La Cruz, can you speak a little bit to that? And also, you know, for someone watching who may not understand, what is the difference and why should we be focusing on the difference? Because I think sometimes, especially white people, don't understand that and kind of get caught up on, well, why is there a difference and why can't we all be treated the same? And so I think it's good to start with making sure that we focus on why it is important to look at this very specific topic.
For sure. Thank you. Thank you for, and Helen, it's so nice to see you here for Hispanic Heritage Month. And Valeria, it's so nice to meet you. I'm super interested in this, the uncolonized Latina. That's like my everyday mission in life here. But so first, when we talk about, so first of all, it matters because, you know, Latinos are 23% of the state population in New Jersey. But to me, at the heart of this matters because it's like at the heart of human rights, right? Like when you're talking about mental health, you're talking about the human experience, right? And our feelings, our emotions, basically like what it means to be a person, to be people, to be human, and our emotional experiences. So whenever I'm talking about Latino mental health or mental health in the Latino community, you know, I always make sure, no matter who I'm talking to, that I say some very specific things, right? Like set some really standards about like, make sure we're having the same conversation. So one of the things that I love to talk about is debunking this myth of stigma. There's always stigma around, you know, Latino community doesn't, you know, the stigma is fearful of mental health services, or, you know, Asian American communities don't trust mental health providers. In reality, if we're going to work from an anti-oppression, anti-racist standpoint, right, we wouldn't blame a marginalized community for their condition. We have to understand, like here we're in the United States and we're looking at the world through the lens and the history of this country. And of course, it's very comfortable to minimize the emotional state of a community that has been marginalized for decades, right, in this country, right? It's like that huge, it's part of the way in which we dehumanize people, right? People incarcerated, homeless, people without homes. And we do this to Spanish speaking communities and Latino communities and immigrant communities in this way. So I always say, when we talk about stigma in Latino community, I always say, you know, Latinos are very emotional. So I don't really understand, like we have all types of feelings. We love talking about art, you know, all types of emotions, and we're very expressive. But when we're talking about mental health, we have to understand that the dialogue that we have here is around disease, illness, what's wrong with you. And these are all very scary ideas, you know. So I always say it's not so much that the Latino community is stigmatizes mental health, but that mental health systems stigmatize Latino communities in the way in which services are provided, right? We don't want to blame the community for the condition, but really in the way in which we approach mental health really does not meet the needs of the majority of Latino communities throughout the state. First of all, we practice a very Western Eurocentric way of practicing. That's like tradition, all the mental health disciplines, right? Like this is what we teach. So we're kind of like speaking two different languages in the therapy room to begin with, right? Because we have this way of dealing with things, and the community is going to come with their own experience, their own human experience that is just as valid as all the knowledge that academic programs produce and teach. So that's the first dialogue I always say. You never want to stigmatize the person. It's the system that creates stigma because of the dominant narratives in mental health services. And then when we want to talk about barriers, like that's just to start with, right? And then when we're going to talk about barriers and actually accessing care, it's these real conditions that limit people from accessing mental health services, access to insurance, that provides care, lack of, and I mean, it's deficits at every level. It's deficits in accessing care because you don't have health insurance. If you do have the access to health insurance and you can't get an appointment, can you get an appointment with a provider that speaks your language or understands your culture, or can assess your mental health status in the context of your culture? Because this is a huge skill that is not
Right.
traditionally taught. And then we kind of get into things like that, and then the therapy approaches, the way programs are set up, the way we bill for mental health services. Do we acknowledge bilingualism as a higher billing rate? All these little policies and deficits do, and in addition to the limitations that it is for to enter the field, right, through licensing and all the parameters and gatekeeping. I mean, it's a deficit, and there's barriers not just in accessing service, but pretty much at every level of direct practice, becoming a mental health provider, and even in the policies, in the ways that programs are developed and mental health services are delivered. None of it is really intended to meet the needs of Latino communities.
Yes, yes. And as you know, the YWCA has been doing a racial and cultural empathy training for some time for our mental health communities because of all the bias in licensing exams, and we know the bias in the schools that most of the therapists look more like me, and right there is a core problem, for sure, in which obviously you've noted on top of so many others. So it's absolutely, so many systems, so many issues. What kind of policy change or what kind of initiatives do we need to start to address all of what you just shared? I mean, there's so many layers in it. It's not like we can say, "Oh, it's that. Let's fix it."
Yeah. So when I think about the ways that I want to influence change in mental health policy so that it is more accessible to Latino communities, and so we're meeting that need. I'm a big fan of efforts at our federal level, like the Mental Health Act for Latinos, that is investing millions of dollars into research. We need that. We need research that is inclusive and intended. That has the mindset from onset of cultural sensitivity, as opposed to like after the fact, because that's
Mhm.
usually that's how it's done. It's like, okay, we have CBT, and now we have CBT for Latinos, or CBT with the Muslim community, like, as opposed to entering a research with that scope in mind. I think we need more of that. We also need real investments in how, well, first of all, we should all be concerned about affirmative action being repealed, right? We should all be concerned about this because California saw a 50% drop in Black and Latinos entering college because of this. So we want to recruit mental health professionals. We're going to have real trouble getting our students into college to become mental health professionals. And then we have so then I always talk about, like, okay, workforce, right? How do we create a workforce? How do we make it so that students who are undocumented can become licensed mental health professionals? to provide care, because less and less are Latinos who are born in the United States learning to speak the language. But more and more, we have to rely on our immigrant children and the resources of our entire community to meet the need of our community. So, how do we create the avenues for those who are undocumented to become licensed mental health professionals and enter the field and provide service? So, that's something that we've been really involved in raising money for to help undocumented students become, bilingual social workers, bilingual clinicians. I think we have to, I'll say it here live, right? Abolish our licensing process. Like, and if not abolish it, we need to like then implement things that, this to me is like a civil rights complaint, like, that we don't have it language accessible, that we don't provide a translation in the 5 or 6 basic languages that, people speak in New Jersey, which is actually like 20 something languages, so many, but that we don't provide translation, that we don't provide, like, so all those things those are policy things that I think we can implement, we can ask for, we can demand, and we should all collectively demand that, because it just makes our world a better place. And then I think we need to also challenge a little bit the way we traditionally think about mental health treatment. As much as I am like, everyone should become a mental health professional, I am not really confident that that's the way that mental health needs of Latino communities should be treated. And I'm really invested in like more community like promotore programs that have like peer to peer in language and can kind of demystify some of the mental health jargon and language and system barriers, to help people get into care. To me, it's like about building community and not just like creating all these licensed people. Like, I think mental health is something that we should all be invested in, and we should have a workforce that at every level, like prevention, intervention, treatment, and rehabilitation. Like, we need all of it. And to me, I think we need to look at like more prevention ways to do things in community.
Well, obviously, you're talking about really reimagining our system in a way that it is focused on really bringing us to where we need to be as opposed to where it is. And I heard some calls to action in there. We as at the YWCA, focus a lot on our advocacy. So I can see where we can step up and step in and join. But it sounds like some of it really is that we should be joining together to say, let's do things differently. That it's
Yeah,
not just using the existing systems. It's really about, creating new ones.
it's
They're so
about build
broken. Yeah, they're so broken.
right, and building partnerships, right? Like, I, like things like one of our Hispanic Women's Resource Centers does kind of take up space out of a church in Lakewood, right? Like, and they have like promotoras there, kind of like buffering people through. But it's about partnerships. It's about like having partnerships with trusted messengers that you know in the community, and sharing resources and building community and knowing who those partners are, so that like, let's say if you are providing like a mainstream service in this way that you want to reach the whole community, it's about building partnerships with the agencies and the people that are trusted messengers in the community.
Yes, yes, and it makes sense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
people want to, mental health services is really about creating a safe space to be able to do the work. And if we don't have that for our Latino community, then we can't expect that they are going to be able to access, and feel safe to be able to explore and get the support that they need. So Dr. De La Cruz has spent, this time opening us up in the conversation about just kind of a different lens to look at all of this conversation through. So Valeria, your book, it is focused on stories and narratives. How can we take now some of those personal experiences, and I know they illustrate and how we take those to kind of illustrate why it's so important to break down our mental health barriers within the Latino community. And how can we use the individual stories to really help drive this change that Dr. De La Cruz is talking about?
Yes, so thank you for having me. Thank you for this opportunity. And what I can share with you is when I was in the process of writing the book, as an immigrant Latina, white immigrant Latina, my first intention was to bring together the voices of our community. So I interviewed 55 Latinas. And the first intent of the book was to help identify and map out cultural ways of thinking that may hold us back, and to offer a roadmap for professional success. But I have to say that in most of those 55 interviews, people, like, we were crying. So my only question as an icebreaker in those interviews was, tell me about yourself and how you grew up. And when these Latina women revisited their stories as immigrants or as children of immigrants, they broke down, and I started to explore a universe that to me was a little bit of unknown, I would say. Even though in 2016, I had my own experience with a burnout that I had to stop working in corporate. But it's only now that I can see, looking back, all the mental challenges that I was facing. But because we are not used to even the possibility of I'm struggling, right? We're a community that keeps going. We keep working hard. Oh, ya se te va a pasar. You will get over it, right? Or es para locos la terapia. The therapy is for crazy people. We heard that in our communities a lot. Therapy is for crazy people. So we don't want to consider ourselves crazy. You don't call yourself crazy. That's an extreme. So you deny your own reality in a way, and you keep going and you do not seek for help. And I've done that, and my family around me did not even, and I had an MBA. I have an MBA, okay? So it's not, I had access to education, worked in the best companies you can imagine, and still this topic is so taboo and stigmatized. So, that personal story, but then when I'm immersed in these 50 stories with other women, and they break down and they start talking about their struggles, I started to realize that we carry trauma in silence. And initially, I had that same tendency of, oh no, my book is not about trauma. It's not about trauma. I don't want to write about trauma, but it kept coming up to the point that I had a dream with the word trauma in my dream showing up, the word in my dream, trauma. So it was undeniable that I had to process that myself and to bring those voices. So I have learned through those stories that there is trauma in the immigration experience, not just before. For many immigrants, there's trauma before immigrating because they face in their home country systemic issues, domestic violence, lack of access, food issues, insecurity. So there are countries that still face, as we know, those issues. So there's trauma before coming to the US. There's trauma in the process of coming to the US, and there's trauma after you move to the US. It's a different culture. The feeling of the cultural shock is real. The feeling that you don't belong, that you have to stay in a corner, work hard, and don't have a voice. Even as a legal immigrant, and I will take the opportunity to say that almost 90% of Latinos in the US are legal. It's a small percentage that is illegal, but media maximize that in a way, right? So, and then looking into the stories of daughters of immigrants, a very similar situation when they saw their parents struggling, to make a living, having more than 2 jobs. In some cases, also issues at home with alcoholism or domestic violence or stress, chronic stress, not being able to cope with this culture shock. And not only that, but my big eye-opening moment was talking to these Latina women who, as little girls, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, they had to go with their parents to the doctor's office, to the government's office, to a translator, because their parents didn't speak English, right? So they were the translators, and they observed their parents being dismissed by the system. Not only that, they had to translate words of dismissal and rejection, word by word, to their parents. So imagine what it does to you as a kid to go through that type of experience. So all of these topics, I was so surprised because I had been in the US at least 17 years when I started to do this type of work. Some of my friends had been friends for more than 10 years, close friends, and they never, ever, ever spoke about those issues. So I was wondering, wow, we're so close as friends, and we never spoke about something that really marked you in such a deep way. So that talks about how stigmatized and how hidden the topic is, that even among family members or close friends, we are feeling super uncomfortable about talking about it. So this journey of writing a book became to me my purpose of helping these women feel seen and feel heard. So something that I love hearing from women when they read my book is I felt seen and heard for the first time. Because I really believe that when you allow a person to feel seen and to feel heard through stories of other people who went through similar things, it does something to you. It starts healing your self-worth because now you know you're not alone. Now you know there's not something wrong with you. There's something wrong with the system, something that is bigger than you. You're not the problem, right? And we're on this together to find the solution. So that relief that people feel and that feeling seen and heard really moves something in them, and that's when they start seeing, okay, so I see that I now understand where this that I'm feeling is coming from. And now they can see that there is also a way out, that they can seek for help, that they can take steps to start healing and to start overcoming all that trauma.
I can hear as you're describing what the book has done, that it is so empowering for those who read it to be able to be seen and heard. And that is clearly one of the such an important piece of the work that you've created. I guess I'm also wondering, from your book, what other takeaways do you want, and do you believe that your Latino communities and any of us who are, engaged in wanting to support our Latino communities, what do you want us to take away from the book as well?
For Latinos and for allies, yes. So that book is a journey. It goes deep into disclosing in a way why and how, as Latinas and Latinos, we struggle in the US. So Dr. Giseli was mentioning before that the Latino community is very significant and big in this country. So roughly 20% of the US, and the Latino community will be 30% of the US in 2060. And that means 111 million Latinos in the US in 2060, and right now 60 million. Of those 60 million, 20 million prefer to communicate in Spanish. That in itself is bigger than many countries in the world in terms of the size of the population. So when Dr. Giseli was talking about, the translations, the materials are not in Spanish, is mind-blowing to me. That in 2023, with AI, all this technology we have, materials are not translated into several languages, is very scary. And it talks about people making decisions who are not inclusive.
Yeah, it definitely speaks to that. And I see Dr. De La Cruz was snapping along for that one.
For sure. I mean, I first of all, I have to get this book because I'm, besides trying not, besides, yeah, I gotta get this book because aside from trying not to be triggered, I am also feeling seen and heard by the narratives that you were sharing. Because those are all very experiences that I'm very familiar with, and I'm glad that you write about them and make them visible because it's so important.
Yeah, it was not the intention, but that's where people wanted to go first, to talk about how we struggle, to then look into, okay, how do we overcome this? And to your question, Helen, about what my takeaway is, I want people to feel seen and heard, but also I want them to know these are ways to build your professional life that at the end of the day is so entangled with our personal lives. They are one. And for the allies, importantly, I learned most recently doing speaking and everything that I do with organizations that I can do all this work with Latinas, but unless we bring the allies, the leaders, people in power who are not Latinos to understand us as Latinas, we are not going far. Latinas will have a cultural tendency not to create conflict. So many times we do not speak up, right? Or we may work hard, really hard, but not ask for help or not build that network of sponsors and mentors in our jobs. So in a culture that is all about speaking up, kids start doing the show and tell when they are 1 year old. They barely speak and they are doing show and tells. My kids, now teenagers, used to that. I'm like, oh my God, it's public speaking is a thing here in this country and self-advocacy, right? So the cultural differences are real. So those who are not Latinos and have these positions of power have this amazing opportunity to understand the cultural nuances and to really see, from within our mindset and the way we think, why we may not act in the same way as it is expected, or why we may not trust institutions because we don't trust institutions. I have a family doctor that if she sees this, she's a white woman. I feel each time I do a checkup, I feel I'm going to sit for a final exam at college. It's nerve-wracking to me. All these questions, and she doesn't relate with my culture. I'm still in that situation after 20 years in the US. It's crazy, but it's real. We have an unconscious mistrust of organizations and of people who we perceive to represent a big organization, like the health system is one. So the point of representation and having this connection with people who look like us, but who understand the culture, who can communicate in a way that we can relate is super important to break that barrier of, I don't trust, I feel uncomfortable, I feel shame about even showing up to having an appointment with a therapist. So it's all real. Yeah.
And I'm often approached especially because of my work, and other white people say, I just want to help. How can I help? I hope
Yes.
you're all listening right now, because they're telling us how we can help if you're hearing, and as allies. And I always say, if you that's for you to call me. It's not for me to call myself, quite frankly. But for anyone who wants to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, if that's the mindset that you want to be in, you're hearing what our Latinas need, and you should use your voice to help bring these messages forward in places where change can be made. So I just want to make sure to say that to everyone who's watching who looks like me, that we're getting the list here, and I hope you're paying attention to it. I want to ask a question though that I heard you talk about, and I obviously am aware of this scenario from all the places that I've worked in my career. But you mentioned something very important about our youth, our Latina youth being in situations where they are being interpreters for their family, or that they are, having to really be parentified very at a young age to step in and help manage situations because of potentially a language barrier, and them to kind of step in to help solve a family problem. And what that does to our Latina youth, and what they carry as a result of that. And I'm thinking about generational trauma as well. I mean, here we're talking about the systems not being set up to support our Latinas in our country. You clearly left us with an understanding that it's not just what happens here in this country, but what the experience of what happened in their country, the experience of coming to this country, and then the experience of how we receive them once Latinas come into this country, and what may or may not be positive in that experience as well. So can we talk a little bit about generational trauma and how we manage that specifically in our Latina youth and in our Latina adults now that are, how do we stop that?
Yeah. I guess I'll share a little bit, coming from lived experience and also from like clinical work. Um, there's a couple of things that I think are really important to put in context here. Like, this is why social justice is so important to me, because, and why I started with this debunking myth about stigma, because it's very quick to kind of be on the person instead of looking at the way in which like the conditions created this kind of thing. And when I talk about mental health in Latino families and children mental health, it's the way in which we refuse, literally refuse to provide language access. Because imagine yourself in another country where you do not speak the language, like Japan or Argentina or wherever. So the idea and the panic, that you are in need of some sort of healthcare service and someone is not even willing to speak English or get you a translation machine or make the effort or have a solution or have you wait hours for the solution, delaying your care. Like, this would be, our entitlement would be like unimaginable, right? But this is what we believe because it's what we do. It's the way we do things in US culture, is not to provide, for a lot of reasons, language access to basic human services that every person, regardless of their immigration status, or this is like in our constitution, should have. So what we do clinically when we do that is that we disrupt an entire family system. And when we think about slavery and the way in which oppression and colonialism works, the main way it worked, it was to destroy the family unit so that they are no longer able to, you want to make per person less of a person, so you're going to disconnect them from blood and from family. You're going to disrupt their family unit to a point that it doesn't work anymore. So parents can't be parents, children can't be children, cousins can't be cousins, and nobody can address their needs. And when you frame it like that, like, yes, we should all be equally appalled that we don't have solutions to these problems. So to me, the first thing about thinking about young children's mental health is to think about the many ways in which we reinforce
Mm.
that they're above their parents in this way in this country, literally because their parents don't speak the language, and how harmful that is. And as a parent, how horrible would it be to be minimized in that way repeatedly all day, in front of your child, and how humiliating that would be. This would be, um, like, inhumane. Like, these are, to me, it's one of the biggest civil rights issues that we have today. It's why it's so important that you're talking about it, because little things like that, is the way in which we purposely create harm to disrupt family units. So the more efforts we have to promote bilingualism, to find solutions that work and like enough for a situation, implement prevention strategies so that a family, it's immigration is disruptive enough, and the more we do to further that disruption, the worse off somebody's mental health will be. And actually, there's research around that. Immigrants have a buffer because in the first 5 years, because of their connection to their language and their culture, and it's the second generation of U.S. born Latinos who are at higher risk for mental health because of oppression and racism and stigma. And again, I don't mean, oh, I'm stigmatizing. I mean a system stigmatizing me by essentially not providing me the care that I need on a regular basis. And I just want to add this other thing about stigma and mental health in Latino communities, because I think it's like super important too. We don't have a history of treating people with mental health conditions very well. So I'm not surprised that most people wouldn't want to open up about, I want to hurt myself, I'm feeling depressed, I'm hearing voices, I'm not feeling right. Because historically, if you're a person of color, a Black person, Latino or otherwise, you could die at the hands of a police officer. We don't, we lock them up, we institutionalize them, we label them, we disable them, medication that has all kinds of policies that are not, that, there's documentaries on how mental health medication, and that's what we do. So who would ever want to be treated that way? This is why I think it's so important when we talk about mental health. Like, we have to realize, like, take this out of the community and let's think about the things that we do to people when they're in need, in a healthcare need, or they have cancer, or they have a mental health diagnosis. We rarely treat people with human dignity and respect when they're at their worst points. And that's just because of the way that our society has determined and it's built.
Yes.
Yeah,
Valeria. Yeah.
yeah, there, so a couple things. Um, because the system is not doing what the system is supposed to be doing, there are many efforts at the grassroots level that try to fill in those gaps. And I know particularly of two organizations. One is Love Latinas on the Verge of Excellence and HISPA, that, in one way or the other, they have this mentorship for Latinas. The main focus may not be just mental health, but it comes up. Like HISPA has role models, and we go to high schools and we go to middle schools. And these kids that may not hear at home certain messages of reinforcement, certain messages of you belong here, basic things that make them feel home in this country, these organizations do something as basic as that. Human beings sometimes need to feel and need to hear that they are in a safe place, that they are home, that they can grow in this country, that there are opportunities for them in this country, that help is available for them in this country. And many times it's through that mentorship that those conversations come up. That closeness between a mentor and a mentee through grassroots. So, and then not going too far. I have two kids, as I said. They are born here in the US and they are teenagers. And I can tell you, daily, as a family, we need to create spaces out of the busyness to listen to them, because the cultural differences now within the family are real. Like my husband and I, immigrants, we have some culture. My kids have a different culture. They even have different ways, I would say, of seeing the world, of communicating, and add technology to that, right? So sometimes it's like we have different cultures within the same home, right? And with different senses of belonging, we feel different about being in the US, very different in the same house. And a key thing is to have in the family that space for the younger ones to communicate, even when we do not understand, because we are not in those same shoes. I was not born in this country. I did not go through the educational system in this country, which has a lot of pressure, pressure, pressure. In Argentina was not so much pressure, very different, right? So here there's pressure. And even though I may not understand what my kids are going through, as parents, we need to allow for those spaces for them to express and not try to change their truth, not try to change their perception or how they are living the lives they are living here, because we cannot entirely relate, because that was not our experience. So that listening to me that starts at home, in a multicultural home setting, as we have now so many millions of homes in the US like that, is super important. And it starts in the small things like that, right? Until we can figure out how we will create a change in the system. And I have to say, it's a question of time, just because this country will be 60% non-white in 2060. So as we take those spaces, as we know, become increasingly educated and access those spaces of power, of decision making, we're going to be thinking about policy and changes that impact and improve the lives of our families as well. So it's a matter of time, right? In the meantime, we have to kind of have these patches to figure out how to best, in the day-to-day, support ourselves.
Yes, it's so interesting to and so important, and I'm so glad that we've had this discussion, this piece of it in particular. I mean, all of it, but in particular now, just thinking about this piece because, you know, and when I say we, I mean people who look like me, may not understand some of the nuances of what you talked about. That it is not just Latinas trying to, access equity in, mental health care and healthcare and within our systems, and the stresses of, and the realities of being Latinas and living in this country. But in addition to that, because of the generational issues within the house, the other piece that families are balancing as well. As you always say, you don't always know what someone's going through, right? Until you have to step in their shoes, right? Sometimes, to gain an understanding. But I most white people could not gain that understanding because we don't have that experience unless we come from another culture and are dealing, and have some familiarity with some of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that's totally fair because even me as a mother of two US born Latino kids, I am aware that I have a hard time relating to their experiences because I have not gone through them. And they are my kids, it's crazy. So I can totally expect that people who didn't have that experience of immigration will not entirely relate to that, because if you don't go through that experience yourself, it's very, very hard to put yourself 100% in those shoes. And Helen, you made a great point before, which is, you mentioned before that how can allies help? And the reality is many times as Latinos, we do not ask, or we do not express what we need. We do not know if it's okay to ask sometimes. Is it okay to ask for help? Where do I go? So knowing that, gives this opportunity to allies to take the first step sometimes and ask, how can I help you? Even at work, managers who can see their employees are struggling, they could take that step and say, how can I help you? There are resources. Many times in our community, people do not know the resources that we have in this country because the countries where we come from do not have many resources. So we assume that here we don't have resources either. So having those allies who understand the system and help us navigate and share the resources available is life-changing for our people, for our communities.
Well, I always say time goes so quickly when we start having these discussions, and I also just want to say how grateful I am and how generous it is for both of you to share your experiences, to be able to educate us, and to be able to, and I want those listening again who look like me to, now that don't unknow. You can't unknow. We know. We've learned tonight, and there were calls to action here, and there were real concrete ways that we can help, and support change that we need to see in our communities, and as individuals, ways that we can step up and step in, whether it's in the workplace, in the school, when you see something with another family that you can step in and support, and help provide resources and connections, and also question our system more and get engaged in organizations like the Latino Action, the Latino Action Network, and get connected and understand why it's important to be part of these social justice movements, because sometimes we have to do two tracks simultaneously: make the change and also quickly jump in and try to provide as much support as we can while we're trying to also blow up the systems and get them where they need to be, because what we have now is clearly failing so many people, in our country. And the numbers, I mean, we're hearing the numbers. It should be shocking, and it also should be unacceptable. So as we're closing out, I just want to ask you both if there's anything else that you'd like to share with our viewers, and also, if there's any other call to action, anything else on the topic you want to say. We have links to the work that you all are doing, to how to get to your book, how to get to your organizations, and we do encourage everyone to take time to get there. and learn more, because we didn't even scratch the surface. Hopefully, we did enough to make you want to learn more. But please, whoever wants to jump in and start.
I always say, we're the Latino Action Network Foundation, and all our volunteers, like, I'm always surprised at who sees the word Latino, and like people are like, I want to go, you know what I mean? And we love it. Like, we're like, venga, and community, you know what I mean? So I hope people also think, okay, yeah, there's lots of issues, but one of the things that is matters is, like, go to a Latino business, engage in the culture, expand your experience of the world, and we love being in community, you know what I mean? So hopefully you find, like, things about Latino culture that you feel might be at home for you too, because that's also a big part of about how we view mental health is, and how we view community. So hopefully people are inspired to do that.
And I was thinking something similar. You mentioned community, and I was thinking together, right? To me, the word together, I have to say, I came to this country coming from a humble family in Argentina, um, having the opportunity to come to study here and then work. And I've been here for 20 something years. The doors that this country opened for me is unimaginable for anybody in my family. The opportunities came from the non-Latino community, from the white community, the Black community, the Asian community. I had mentors, sponsors, doors that open, that still keep opening. So to me is, the more we can learn how to work together, because this country is going to be increasingly diverse and is the best country on the planet, the more we can, figure out how to work together to overcome that sense of division that we may have sometimes. That's an opportunity, I believe, big opportunity for the country, and to know that we can take each other, upward and forward in more meaningful ways, understanding who we are and having these conversations, important conversations like today, to me brings, hope to my day. So I'm grateful to having a little piece of contributing, to this conversation, and the way upward and forward is definitely together.
Juntos.
Juntos in Spanish, exactly.
Well, that's a together is a great place to, and I don't want to say end, but just to stop, because clearly there's so much more to say, so much more to do, and I really do hope for everyone watching that you do, again, take time to go to, we have put all these links here for you in the comments. Please visit, follow, stay connected to the work that both of these amazing humans are doing. I know I'm always watching what they're doing. And, I know that they get a lot of calls during this month, but I want you all to call them throughout the year, because these conversations are important every day of the year. And again, we didn't even wrap up this one topic, and this is just one topic. And I also want to share, and which I'm very excited for. Our YW Gala is in a few weeks, and we're honoring Dr. Patricia Campos at our gala.
I love Dr. Patricia Campos. She's the best. I love her.
Yes.
She is a amazing
Yes.
civil rights activist,
Powerhouse.
Yes.
an amazing leader. She also is a Latina, and she's another one that I just watch and admire. I've seen her speak. I've been in her presence personally, watching her speak. I follow her as well, and all the amazing work that she's doing. We are so lucky to have all of you in our community, and we celebrate you every day. But I'm really so grateful that you both taken some time to, and again, you're so generous to share all the knowledge that you have and to help educate us to do better. And we can, and we must. And now we have some ways, hopefully, that you're all left with a to-do list. And I always say to everyone watching YWTV, don't let what you learned stop here. Think about something that you heard today and drop it into a conversation tomorrow with someone else. Take the link to this broadcast, text it to a friend, throw it on your Facebook page, stick it in Messenger. Part of the community that we've tried to create with YWTV is sharing the information, and you're part of that. So please we've hopefully planted some seeds for you to get more active. And again, both of the organizations have that you can connect to through going to these sites here will give you other action items, too. So please engage there as well. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And again, thank you, Dr. De La Cruz. Thank you, Valeria. I am so grateful for the work you're doing. We will keep watching, and we will keep talking. This is not the last conversation for sure. More to come.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good night, everybody.